So Rohit is the managing director of Future Communities Capital. It's fantastic for him to take the time to join us. Rohit has, let me see here. We just got to move this. Rohit's led investments into Coupang, Biomeme, SpaceX, Lyft, Roofr, and more. And Future Communities Capital focuses on technology entrepreneurs, disrupting legacy industries such as government, healthcare, finance, real estate, and more. And so with that, Rohit, I'm going to pass it over to you, and maybe you could just give us a 1 to 2 minute further introduction of yourself.
All right. Appreciate the intro, Kevin, and happy to be here. This is a fun opportunity for me to sort of like hear what founders like yourselves are doing, what you're building, as well as kind of maybe give you an insight into how VC is looking. I've been in venture capital for 15 years. I run Future Communities Capital. I write a ton of personal checks, and I am an active investor, and I don't plan on stopping regardless of the economy. One note, I'm happy to hear what all of you are personally building. Happy to sort of have that conversation if you want to talk about your company. If it's okay with everyone, let's really just dive deep into questions. If you want to ask broader stuff instead of like, hey, my company, and like, you can pitch me later, in other words.
Well, awesome. Well, so the format for today, it's good. It's a good segue, Rohit, is you all asked questions upon registration. And we have organized probably the top 5 or 6 of those into concise, summarized questions here. And so I'm going to moderate a few minutes here with Rohit. We're going to ask some of those common questions that you guys all submitted upon registering, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A after that. So, Rohit, with that, I'm going to kick it off and jump into it. I'm going to start with some more general advice, and then we're going to get into kind of more granular, specific. But let's start it. Let's bring it home. When one of your own portfolio companies comes to you, all right, and says, I'm fundraising, like, what advice do you give them typically?
Okay, so there's the sort of basic advice, and then we can get sort of more nuance, and it kind of depends on the company itself. But the basic idea behind fundraising is you have to have a product or a company or an idea that somebody like myself wants to invest in, and you also have to assume that I know nothing about your industry. I know nothing about your company. You're really telling a story. And if you can nail that first part of like, here's why what I am building is relevant, and then we can move on into the actual product. But you first have to convince me there's a problem. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yeah, I think that's great. So storytelling is a big component of getting that right. Yeah.
So the only way story isn't important is if you're like, I have tons of revenue, right? And it's just a by the book sort of company. But I think early stage companies really it's very story driven, it's very people driven, at least for me. And so if you can sort of show me the why, what, how behind the numbers, that's where it gets interesting.
So I mean, my brain immediately goes, right. A lot of founders, or maybe if they're in an accelerator or they have investors, are like, hey, here's the format of a typical pitch deck. And I think for years, even myself, it was like, oh, we'll stick to the 12-slide pitch deck, problem, solution, product, traction, right? But it feels like in recent years, storytelling and the emphasis on telling your story, your narrative has kind of started to wash away that like tried and true template. How do you think about that? Sticking to best practices versus storytelling?
Yeah, that's a great sort of like lead in, right? Like take a template, whether it's YC, Sequoia, whatever, take one of those templates and use that to map out, storyboard what you're trying to tell somebody, right? And that's not going to cover all the nuance. It's not going to cover the specifics of what you're building, but it's a really good framework. And then, like it's going to zig and zag and have some more interesting sort of stuff built around it. And when you're pitching, it's really that story around the storyboard that comes out. That's what you want somebody to understand, right? And if you're pitching somebody, I tend to be very conversational and probably a little bit irritating, and then I'm just constantly asking questions. I met these founders last night. It was probably about almost 10 o'clock by the time we finished. I just kept hammering these two, just question after question. They were, I think, like it was super interesting. There's an opportunity there to kind of move away from the pitch deck, and the pitch deck ends up being sort of backup material,
Yeah.
right? So I the way that I find myself effective at pitching, and what sort of resonates with me on both sides of this, is just talk about what you're doing. If you're excited about it, that'll come through, and then send the pitch deck as a follow-up. I don't really need a pitch deck in advance. Certainly, you don't need to bust out your laptop and go through it unless there's something very technical, like something details, you want me to see. Like they wanted to
Yeah.
show me this, bio stuff that they were building.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to come back to this in a few minutes because I want to talk more about investor meetings. And, actually, let's just go there now because we're on the topic. So this idea of like, okay, I'm holding an investor meeting, right? I've got a meeting and now I'm holding it. The format of that, I think sometimes people want to jump right into like, let me pitch. I'll just get into the pitch, but don't maybe realize that the intangibles, how was your weekend, like kind of shooting the shit in the background is actually relationship building. And the goal of the
Yeah.
meeting really, yes, you got to communicate your business, but you're also relationship building. And so how do you think about when you get an investor meeting, how should founders be thinking about running that meeting, structuring that meeting, and building that relationship?
Right. That's critical. It is a relationship. I think most deals, and as much as we say they're not, relationship driven deals are a big thing. I and I'm transparent about this. I don't invest in people I don't like. If you are a awful person, don't even bother knocking on my door. It's just not going to happen. And so part of that, the flip side of that is that you want to know who I am too. If you're talking to me and you get the vibe that we're not going to click, you probably don't want to take money from me, right? If I'm a super irritating investor and you just know it's going to like just bother you, there's probably better money out there. And so, yeah, I mean, you talk about like, water cooler talk. How's your weekend? I have very bland, basic questions. Where are you located? Where are you based? How's the weather? Whatever. Like right now, it's like super smoky here in the Bay Area because of wildfires. Oh, how's that treating you? Whatever. And you kind of, it'll go somewhere interesting. You just start very big and open and, see where you end up.
Okay, cool. Well, the other thing I want to talk about is changing market dynamics. So you alluded to it a little bit in your intro, right? Clearly, the venture capital landscape is changing. It's in some ways correlated to 0% interest rates and the rise in rates. And to give a little background to those listening, right? Like if I can get 8% on the stock market, like a VC fund has to return more than that, right? And that's why
Right.
VCs are always looking for these higher valuations, higher returns. And so with interest rates going up, the bar is only going higher for the VCs, which means the bar is going higher for the companies they're investing in, right? And so at the same time, valuations are coming down. How are you thinking
Right.
about all of the changing things in sort of the venture landscape? And is it healthy? Is it bad? What's your perspective on it?
It's a mixed bag. I think a lot of it is probably healthy. I think we got a little overheated, and this is geographically sort of like biased here, right? Like in the Bay Area, valuations have been high for a long time, and they got really high, you know, and they sort of crashed down to earth. That's probably a good thing. And there's kind of creeping up again because of AI. Gen AI is having a moment. Um, it's important to sort of refocus and recenter. I'd say as an investor myself, like I've never really been caught in hype cycles. We invest long term. We invest in stuff that's people look at it and they're like, yeah, it's not like, you're not sending rockets into space. I'm like, yeah, I'm not, I'm making money. I'm not worried about like all this other like cool stuff, we love what our founders build and we support them every step of the way and how they see the future, not how I sort of like want to like follow trends or whatever. But yeah, I think that's as the low interest rate environment has definitely impacted funds in terms of there's just a lot. I think LP money is getting tougher to invest, to find. Um, I don't know. I'm not fundraising, but it's definitely I hear that it's challenging environment to raise capital. If you are a fund that invests in sort of off the beaten path startups, so probably companies outside of the Bay Area, New York, Miami, Boston, Austin, and your valuations are more reasonable, and it probably wasn't a big thing. Like we're just kind of plugging along. Um, What was the other part of that? Did I miss something?
Well, I'll add a follow up to it. Like in my talking to
Yeah.
founders, and I'm sure it's a little different in the Bay Area versus outside the Bay Area, right? So I'm in New York, and um, I think there's this mindset, or I sometimes get asked, oh, we hear the market's down. It's a bad time to fundraise. It's not what it was 2 years ago. Should I just wait till January, or should I just wait out the market or whatever? And the answer is no, right? The answer is like now is still
Right.
always sort of the best time. But for those that are kind of on the fence, or like, oh, the market's not what it was. If maybe they were fundraising 8-9 months ago, like what is changing for them, right? Are they just lowering the valuation on their safe note? Like what is tangibly changed in the last sort of year and a half?
Right. To your point, the best time to raise is when you need capital, before you need capital. So I think as a founder, you kind of have to have that crystal ball and say, hey, when can I actually go out and get investor interest? And that's kind of like, you have to have, again, goes back to story. What can you tell founder or tell investors that says there's something happening here, right? Whether it's product launch, you're getting some traction, some sort of like little nugget of like interest. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about how that's going to work for you. Um, yeah, that's a tough one. It's fundraising is kind of an art and a science. I think
Yeah.
that um, having a very clear line of sight to how much money you need, right? So I look, valuations have come down, and also round sizes like amounts have come down, and headcount has come down. Like it's all sort of like lockstep. Everything is kind of tied in together.
Yeah.
Okay, we were going to hire 4 engineers. We're going to get by with 3, and we're
Right.
going to go outsource to a dev shop, right? Whether it's offshore or whether it's domestic. And it's sort of my advice to founders is, if you think you can do this, I had this conversation like I think yesterday. They were saying, oh, we're going to raise $2 million. Well, how far does $2 million get you? Well, it gets us 30 months of runway. Okay, what like milestones? How far does it get you? Well, it gets us this, and this, like 5 things. Like how much do you need for 2? Scale it back, right? Because you're gonna inevitably, if you're trying to plan 2 years of product development, it's gonna pivot. It's gonna change.
Right.
So say, okay, I can get in 8 months, I can get this far. I'm not advocating you raise money every 8 months. That's a horrible way to live your life, right? But like just having something saying I can get to a reasonable spot to go and tell my story and so show that there's progress,
Yeah.
right? So you say I need 6 months of time to go build, deploy, sell, whatever. I'm going to have 12 months of runway. That's how much I'm trying to raise, something like that.
Yeah. 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 It's very different than the normal like 18 to 24 months kind of. It's kind of like a wartime mentality almost. Yeah.
It's a little tighter now.
Yeah. So you touched on something there, and I'm going to break this into a two-part question, right? So creating momentum is something that came up in a lot of the registration questions, right? So
Yeah,
how can you create momentum for your fundraise, get people excited? I'm going to break this into 2 things, like pre-seed, which is like sort of pre-product, pre-revenue, friends and family, like you don't maybe have tons of metrics, right? So I think that is
right.
maybe more storytelling. But then also what came up is like seed to series A. So like how does that then more sort of morph into the next round of funding? And so how do you create that momentum in a round? What's
Right.
important?
So you're kind of hitting on it, right? Like so pre-seed or pre-product, maybe you have an MVP. You have to have a larger story about the industry, the world, like where do you fit in to a larger problem area, right? And then as you get to like seed, series A, it's more like, do people actually pay you for your product?
Yeah. And what are some of those metrics that you tend to look at, right? Are you like jumping into their HubSpot sales pipeline? Like what are you looking at for those metrics?
I'll look at their funnel. Yeah, for sure. I think that's helpful to get an idea of how large, yeah, how many customers they can reach out to. I think that okay, if we look at sort of sales cycle, right?
Yeah.
If I am an investor and I can invest in a company that is idea stage, early product, those are still pre-product, MVP. Now they're selling something versus a company that, hey, I just need money to activate a bunch of accounts. I have a bunch of LOIs, a bunch of contracts signed. I just need money to go live. that's who, most people want to invest in, right? So if you can say, I need money to generate revenue versus I need money to go and spend it on a bunch of engineers, very different story, right?
Yeah.
Or even if it's like not revenue, I have a bunch of users on my wait list and I'm close to finishing this out. I just need money to like whatever to go live. And eventually here's how I'm going to turn on revenue with my product. That's interesting. That's super interesting. And you've de-risked it for the investor.
Yeah, and I think it's to your point. It's like it can sometimes be, and I'm guilty of this myself, as you know, and other people know. Like it's super nuanced, right? Sort of just like sort of how you talk about yourself. And I think one of the things is just like repetition, like getting in the reps, is just the way that you refine that story, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
So how do you think about like a proper fundraising process? It feels like to me like in this new market, you can't just like say I'm raising, throw a safe out and close $4 million. Like you actually have to like approach things with a process, which I'm clearly biased on because of Finta and my mentality of this. But putting that aside, how do you think about a fundraising process and encouraging founders to do that?
Right. So there's a few steps, right? One is you have to have something people want to buy. I assume you're all in that boat, check, right? And then you've got to figure out what your story is around your product. Okay, we'll get that done. And then you got to go find investors. This
Yeah.
is the trickiest part for someone who's never done this before. How do you find somebody that will give you money? Most people and look, I appreciate and that not everyone comes from that sort of background, but I strongly advise people to go raise friends and family money for a couple of reasons. One is if you're raising friends and family money, you can go pitch people with very little consequence, right? If you go pitch a VC and you blow the pitch, you don't get another shot. You go pitch your cousin, you might get some good feedback on like, that didn't really work for me. And they're still at the end of the day, still your family. They might even still write you a check because they're family.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And the second part is like, if you really believe your product, your company is going to work, those are the people you want to make rich. Your friends and family. It is not me. I'm going to get mine. But if your friends and family, you bring them along for the ride, everyone's better off.
Yeah, and those
Right.
could
So
be super small checks too. Like you make it
super
accessible.
small
Yeah.
checks. Yeah. Right. I mean, like I've had friends like tiny check, even into my fund, friends and family. I wrote like the smallest checks were just people I've known forever. Like, hey man, I just want to support you.
Yeah.
Like my very first investor wrote me a paper check. He's like, here's a paper check. I don't know what to do with this, man. Like we take wires here, but and then you'll see that it kind of branches out from there, right? So you'd be surprised the networks that most of us run in if you are kind of already in tech. It's okay, I know so and so's like friends and family. They know so and so. They'll make an introduction for me, and it just sort of goes from there. Or you start going to events. You hit up people on LinkedIn. I strongly advocate getting a warm intro.
Yeah.
If I get a warm intro to a founder, I will probably take the meeting. If somebody drops a cold email in my inbox, I try, but it's really hard to sort of stay on top of that. I just get so many of those a day.
Some of the data we're seeing is that like of a closed round, like 92% typically comes from warm intros, which is why we built into how we've built it, and 8% comes from cold. And of that, the warm intros are larger checks. And so
Right.
I'm never going to say cold doesn't work. I'm just going to say that it's a last resort after you've done everything you can to try to get a warm intro pathway to a person.
It's really rare,
Yeah.
and look, this is a challenge for founders across the spectrum, right? Founders really like there's always somebody else they want to talk to, and how do they make that connection? I've sat down with people and they're like, well, who do you know? I don't know who I know. Like that's such a weird question. Like it doesn't really come to top of mind all the people I can introduce someone to.
Yeah.
Even if we're sitting there brainstorming, right? And so like LinkedIn kind of becomes useful for this, but like there's so, like, if you think about it, I have hundreds of connections on LinkedIn. We're not going to go through page after page after page of this. And I'm certainly not going to do that for every founder and every friend, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I've, shameless plug, but Finta's made my life easier, right? Finta's sort of, I told my portfolio, I said, hey, I'm on Finta. If you need help, you want to talk, whoever in my network, you want an intro, go on Finta and like, let's figure out who those people are. And I just blast out intro emails. It has made it so much more efficient on my end, right? Like the people who are connectors in your network, if you make it easy for them to make intros, they will do it.
Right. Well, thank you.
If you,
I appreciate the
yeah,
kind.
for sure. I mean, no, it's made my life easier. If it's difficult for me, and if you just say, "Hey, I'm looking for investors. Who should I talk to?" I don't know what to do with that,
Yeah.
right?
You got to make the lift easy. And I think something I just want to double down on that you said is like bottom up prospecting versus top down prospecting, right? So like bottom up is friends, family, people you know. I can't tell you how often people come to me and they're like, I want an intro to Rohit or some mentor, some investor friend of mine, and they haven't gone through the most obvious is they're on LinkedIn. They
Right.
haven't looked at their own Facebook, their Twitter followers. Go through the people you've texted Happy New Year to, because for some reason we all text like more people Happy New Year. Like go through your contacts. When's the last time you opened the contact app? Like, so a lot of people try to skip bottom up and go straight to top down. And I think psychologically, I understand that it's less scary to pitch like a stranger than like leveraging some lifelong friend or connection. And so but I think you're right. You have to go bottom up first, and then those people become your pathways, your mutual connections to the top down, the Forbes Midas list or the Seed 75 on Business Insider or those people you want to get to. And so that really is the way to do it, and figuring out how you build that network to get to those other people. And at the end of the day, this is sort of contrarian advice, but you can also find ways to add value to those people, right? You could host VC office hours. You could, this sort of depends on your product, but like I have a podcast. Can't tell you how often I've had people on my podcast that creates a relationship, right? This is about relationship building and opening doors, and figure out how before you can transact and take from that person, and I need you to invest in me, you can maybe add value to them and build a relationship. And so, yeah, I think I love what you said there.
Yeah, it totally makes sense.
All right, we're gonna do one or two more kind of pre-canned questions, and then we're gonna open it up to the audience here. And when I do call on you, maybe if you want to just throw your name in the chat here, and I'll call on you. And then when it's your turn, if you could just unmute and turn your video on, and we can throw you in the ring here. So what spaces, you mentioned generative AI, like what spaces are you most excited about right now? Are you looking at climate tech, carbon credits, fission, like what is hot in the valley right now? What are you seeing?
Right now, like a lot on AI.
Yeah.
Um, it's it's an interesting sort of, it rarely does one product just sort of open up an industry like ChatGPT has,
Yeah.
right? Even the products that sort of did open up industries, like Google blew away search in the early 2000s, right? The iPhone changed mobile. It took a while. It took like years before like people really even started harnessing what the iPhone can do. But OpenAI and like ChatGPT, like overnight, like the world changed. And I think we're still in the very early stages of understanding where this leads. Um,
How though
that
does
said, yeah,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll follow
I
up.
would say like a lot of AI companies are they're just sort of wrappers on top of another LLM, and it's just not that interesting. They don't own the data. They're not building their own models. Um, they're just, that seems ephemeral to me.
Yeah. Well, something that I like is you've been in the game for a long time, right? And I've almost eclipsed a decade in VC as well. And I feel like this time sort of feels different for me because it's not my first time through a cycle. I feel like I went through the mobile cycle, and through all that, everything felt new and fresh. But now that it's kind of coming around again, it's this new thing. Someone's going to build the flashlight app for AI, and then Apple's going to Sherlock it. Like you can start to like have takeaways, and it won't be exactly the same. But what do you, how do you feel like being through a cycle has informed your perspective on today, and how is that helpful to you?
I think there's just more patience,
Yeah.
right? There's the sort of, we've always been patient capital, patient to invest, patient to hold. We don't really tell our founders what to do with their companies. We're very founder friendly.
Yeah.
Um, but just that perspective of the world's going to keep changing, and we're kind of along for the ride. And on my best days, I feel like I'm sort of building the world I want to see through investing capital. And
Yeah.
kind of having that outlook on, well, if I can deploy capital, where do I want it to go, and what is the future that I want to see?
Yeah. All right. Well, nice. Well, let's open it up to Q&A. We've got some in the chat here, and I apologize if I'm going to say your name incorrectly, but Bianabu, how'd I do
Uh,
it?
yeah, great pronunciation.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. What maybe just like 10 seconds about your company, where you're located and what your question is.
Yeah, sure. I'm located in London, in United Kingdom. We are a remote company. We launched a product which is targeting medical technology skill verification platform. This is a combination of AI and blockchain technology. As I said before, so I'm interested to hear, because I had multiple conversations with VCs. Maybe VCs are not the right one and more angels, but typically they say, okay, love your product, great traction. Can you send me demonstration of your traction to provide the evidence that your product is investable? What type of evidence they typically require? We are B2B, B2C product.
I think it depends, like, very specifically on your product, but broad strokes is, does it work? Does it do what you say it does? And does that solve a real problem? Right? So let's assume that that's all fine, right? And then I just want to see who's buying it and why. There are a lot of companies, and it's probably less so in healthcare, but there are a lot of companies that can sort of get by selling to other startups or selling to their friends. And there's no real there, if that makes sense. And showing me or showing an investor that there's a sales engine and a repeatable sales process is a big deal, right? And saying, okay, look, right now our sales process is inefficient because we're a small team and I do everything. But you can see where this is going. If I hire a couple sales account reps, customer success folks, we're off and running. We're going to crush it.
All
So
right.
it's a combination of where we are today and how capital sort of improves sales.
Yeah, but what if it is pre-revenue product? So say if the sales is not very large and we are pivoting the right funnel and sales process. If this
That's
is
more
not
complicated.
revenue, for instance.
Yeah, that's a lot more complicated. I don't really have all the details, and I'm not sure we can dig in here, but you have to figure out, what can you show somebody that's a positive signal? Like, pivots in and of themselves are not bad. I think every company pivots to some degree. Nobody's ever had an idea and that idea went all the way to like exit. It just has to be very clear why you're pivoting and why the pivot makes sense.
I think
Right.
I would also to jump in, like emphasize kind of what we talked about earlier, like that's where your founder story comes in critically, right? Like your personal origin story for why you started this, and those are the things you have to lean on. And some investors will respect that, some won't, but that's why fundraising is a numbers game. And the ones that it does resonate with, those are the ones you want behind you anyway. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Let's open it up here. Who has the next question? Just raise your hand or unmute. I'm going to call on people if you don't. All right, Michael, go for it. If you could just give us your name, your company, where you are, and actually, I'm going to tweak it a little bit, how much you're raising.
Okay. Michael, John, thanks for coming. It's great to see folks have a great conversation. Cool. The company is Cahill Tech, or a construction education company, SaaS-based, providing safety and training for the construction workers, laborers. we're pivoting, adding a new vertical to direct education of individuals trying to get into construction with our massive infrastructure issues here in the States, with baby boomers retiring, nobody's taking their place, massive shortages, and laborers getting into construction with incredibly good pay. Anyways, we're based out of Buffalo, New York, and we're raising between $750 and $1 million for our bridge round before our Series A. My question is, and I'm happy I'm able to ask this question candidly of a VC that I'm not directly pitching to. Of course, I'll have that conversation if you're interested. But having a candid question of our projections. So I've always been told in the startup land, I've been in startups for about 10 years now, that your projections are known to be padded and aspirational. And in every startup I've ever been in, the projections are, there's no way if this income came in, we could even perform that work. So you as a VC, when you see these projections come in, do you discredit them? Like, there's no way these folks could take on 30x revenue in a year. Or do you see lower projections of, okay, this seems reasonable, like they have their heads on straight and this makes sense? So I'm just kind of trying to like weigh, like, do we play the game of like, oh yeah, everybody knows it's a bit of a hope and a dream, or should we be more realistic in our projections?
I have an interesting question. Yeah, go ahead.
So, all right. So, the answer to you specifically about what should the numbers be is it doesn't matter. Okay. Jeff Wald sold Work Market to ADP for like 800 million. He would always come in and mentor our revenue models class, and he'd give a template to all the founders, and it was very detailed. Everything down to coffee was on this thing, right? The guy sold like 2 companies for hundreds of millions. And he goes, the only thing I know for sure is that this is fucking wrong. But putting the numbers aside, it shows me how you think, and that's what I care about. I want to see how you're thinking through the business. I want to know that you have thought through the business. I did diligence on 700 companies last year. I could tell you of those, it shocked me how few founders actually had even made a spreadsheet thinking through how their business was going to make money, how they were going to spend that money on expenses to grow the business at the top line. So doing the work is what informs you to be better prepared for the investor meetings when you do get asked questions. Don't worry so much about the numbers, make them realistic. Like, don't say you're going to make $1 billion in 6 months, but like, it shows how you think. And that is what I think is critical. And I think every founder should kind of have done this exercise loosely before fundraising. But Rohit, what do you think?
That's spot on, right? Like the thing about projections is that you know they're bad. I know they're bad. You know that I know they're bad. But we still go through the process. And that's really like Kevin's saying, is I want to know, like, can you actually think through this thing and how this company becomes profitable or large, right? There's value in just saying, I can model this out. I mean, because that's not just sales, that's headcount, that's everything kind of gets rolled into that projection, right? Most of the time when people ask that question, they're asking about, are my sales projections valid, as opposed to, can I activate that many accounts, right? That's a very different take on it. I will say that if you are in the problem of, I need money to activate accounts to go live, there's somebody I've invested in companies like that. They're like, dude, I just look at this backlog, man. I need money for contracts. I've invested 100% in companies like that. That's awesome. That's exactly where I want to be.
The other point, I love that. And the other thing I would just highlight here is, because you mentioned you're in Buffalo, and I'm familiar. Be wary of bad investors. There are bad investors who don't have dry powder and don't want to invest, who also don't want to miss a deal because they don't want to look like they've missed. If you do pop off, they want to be waiting in the wings right there, right? So don't let an investor drag you through due diligence for like months and months and months and months, because they're just like, oh, tweak your financial model. Oh, why haven't you adjusted this row? Like, it's just fuck that. And pardon my language. And there you have to have this mindset of abundance. And there's just more fish. There's more investors out there that are better aligned with your business and where you are now. They understand the market. They understand. And yeah, I mean, that's one thing I would say is just be wary of that in the back of your head.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Next question, Luann, I'm going to call on you if you want to just give us your name, your company name, where you are, and how much you're raising.
Okay. Luann DiBernardo. I'm based in Buffalo. My company is Oro Sports and Safety. We design, market, manufacture high impact cooling gear to address people that work and play in heated environments to prevent heat stroke and heat injuries. And as much as I started the company under a different name for different reasons about a decade ago, the world has finally caught up to my solution with a problem bigger than I ever dreamed. So that's who I am. We are in seed round. That last question just was completely liberating. I could hang up right now and be satisfied with this call. I have done projections for the past 6-7 months, turned myself inside out. I've got my crack pipe projections and my lemonade stand projections, and nobody's ever happy with either one. And it's just making me nuts. So that last question was liberating. And it's just finding the investor that feels the same way. As you said, it doesn't matter. At least they see your thinking. So my question was going to be, and still is, but thank you for that last one. How do you reconcile the live pitch with the pitch deck when you're not there representing it, and creating that beautiful story and all that emotion when you're just giving facts and figures? And at what point do you stop giving facts and figures?
I love
During
that
the
question.
pitch?
Well, I think Rohit, it's like, how should you think about, like, sometimes investor founders are told to have two decks, right?
Yep.
The one they
Yeah.
pitch has less text, and the one they sort of share that
For
represents
sure.
the room. And so how do you think about that?
Yeah. You want to, I'm very, so like when someone pitches me and they're like, oh, do you want to do this? Should I go through that? I said, whatever's, and maybe I'm an anomaly, but whatever's comfort for you. This is your time. Like, however you feel you can best present yourself and your story. Great. That said, like, if somebody's like, hey, I want you to sit here for 30 minutes while I go through, 15, 20 slide pitch deck, I'm going to be bored out of my skull. Right. So if you take your audience into account, if you can just have a conversation with me, that goes a long way, because then I'm engaged. I'm hopefully asking questions. It's more like back and forth. And you can also sort of like judge where I am coming from. Right. Like I may be giving you signals like, yeah, I'm not really into this company. And then you can just, I've definitely had founders pick up signals that this is not really resonating, and they can sort of like pivot to what is. Like, you find the source of truth for me and you speak to that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And in terms of your pitch deck, yeah, look, having a short, sweet pitch deck is great. You probably have a lot more information. That goes in the appendix. Jam it all in there. Nothing bloated, but like, I mean, even our pitch deck is half appendix. When we go out and we're pitching our fund, it's important to, you have to think of your audience, right? If you email a pitch deck to me, and by the way, you should not just email your pitch deck. You should use a service like Finta or DocSend or something where you're sending them a link.
Okay.
And if somebody's not clear on that, I can speak to that. But you want to give them you want to think about who's going to read that. Because if you send it to me, I might read it, but 3 associates down from me, some junior level straight out of college, they've never met you. They have no idea what your company's about. They're looking at this thing trying to, is this a real company? Is this something that has legs? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. You want to write to that audience and assume that they know nothing.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is if I can get a live pitch, it's preferred 110%.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So look, I'd go further. It is in person, Zoom, phone call.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah,
Goals
I
to get-
spend
goals to
I
get the
spend
meeting.
hours in coffee shops. I would just sit there and just bang out meetings, you know?
Well,
I'm like,
Thank you, Luann. I appreciate your question.
yeah, thanks, Ken.
Great question. Let's kick it over to Victor. Victor, apologize if I'm saying that correctly, but if you want to unmute and jump in here.
Hey guys, can you hear me well?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Fantastic. So my name is Victor. I'm a co-founder and CEO in Freevo. And what we built in essence is a Web3 super app that lets you create, monetize, and tokenize your value. So you can imagine this as a merging of your financial application, like a banking app, with a social media. And this way, the content creators that nowadays have like problems with monetizing their value because they need to use like Patreon on the way, and a card, the MasterCard's on the way, and a card. There's still
And where
the
I'm
monetization.
just gonna move you forward a little bit here. And where are you and how much are you raising?
Right now we are in angel round, and for the angel round we're raising $200,000. But overall, we have a much bigger target. But we don't want to like raise everything at the same time. We just want to go in steps. So we also started with friends and family. We onboarded like we have on our watchlist like 40 to 50 investors from all those like friends, and we already gathered some financials from those, and we just started to do the outreach. And this week, excuse me.
Where are you located?
We are a global company. I'm located in Poland. Our founder is also on this call right now, so he's right now located in Russia, but we also have like team in Dubai and stuff, and in USA. And so right now there is this thing happening that our team member is going to New York to pitch his idea to investors. We have been invited by an education company that we've been in partnership with, and our advisor is like ahead of this as well. So there's going to be 5-minute pitches, and whenever we will pitching the project, there was like 20 minutes of pitching, like all the details, roadmap, strategy, our plans, development, and stuff. And we are doing this way, but we now need to now condense it all to 5 minutes to make it work at this event, and we want to make the best job possible. So my question is regarding this. How to make your vision and everything that is the most important for the potential investor to get them hooked as soon as possible in 5 minutes so they can be willing to go forward. And this question is also about how much of a storytelling there should be. So basically, should there be like focus on like story and trying to recreate something like, okay, imagine you are this guy, like the content creator that needs to deal with all the bullshit that right now is happening inside of those different fragmented environments of payments and stuff. And the monetization.
I'm gonna clean your question up for you a little bit. So, I'm gonna make it two things, Rohit. So, how do you think about investor hooks? If you really have literally like an elevator pitch, like a 5-minute, 2-minute pitch, how do you think about getting people hooked? And then also let's talk a little bit about like the value of maybe these like sort of events, right? Like if you do get invited to a demo day or some sort of event, like how do you maximize the value of that?
Mm-hmm.
all right, demo days it's like a free for all, right? They're just everybody pitching. So almost paradoxically, they're not going to remember, or I'm not going to remember the nuances of your pitch. I'm not going to remember, oh, well, we have X accounts and ARR is this. Like, I'm not going to remember that. But if you tell me a story, that's what sticks. Hey, we're solving this problem for this person. This is a big deal. Do you remember Uber? Uber's pitch?
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever hear this thing? You think about Uber, right? If you told me like 10, 15 years ago, I'm just going to walk and get into a stranger's car and they're going to drive me somewhere, I'm like, you're out of your mind. Right? But they just like the complexity of we're going to displace taxis by, licensing like random people's cars and it push all that away. It was just push button, get ride. 4 words. You distill it down to like the most basic grain. This is the problem that we solve that everybody can relate to. I need to go to the airport. Push button, get ride.
Mm-hmm.
That's super hard to do.
Super hard to do.
Super hard to do. But if you could get to that point that it's like that simple, that obvious, it's going to go a long way for you. Takes a lot of workshopping, but Thank you very much for your question.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, for sure. I got two more here. I'm going to throw it over. It says 3vo.me, but I don't know what your name is. What's your name?
It's Ayman, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Rohit.
Amen. So yeah, really quick. I know you said in the chat you want to add to this.
2 minutes, just
Yeah,
from previous
go for it.
experience. I'm the CEO and the founder of 3BO. I have an experience. I raised $4.5 million in 2021, 19 institutional VCs, and I agree with everything Rohit said. Personal, you go have a friendly conversation, showing something that is relevant, show the investor exactly how he can not just make his money back, but have a piece of the future. And that's exactly what we're trying to do here with 3vo. 3vo, in short, I wish I can show you the live demo of the app today. 3vo is our vision for the future of how social and crypto, social and finance should be combined. The problem today is that
we're not gonna pitch today.
Sure.
Focus
All right,
on
Kevin,
the
no
question and the story and how we're gonna get
I already left the link there, so
I love the hustle.
Check it out. Yeah, no worries, bro. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have a question or?
No, just thanks for the opportunity. First time here. Great things what you guys are doing, and I think there's a lot of value for every founder to be here and have this conversation with you guys.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Awesome, for sure. I'm gonna kick it over to Basu. Basu, you had a question in the chat. I'll kick it over to you. Your name, company, where you are, and how much you're raising.
Perfect. Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin. Hey, Rohit. My name is Basu, and I represent Make an AI. And today, we are approximately looking to raise 2.5 million. And we are an app, an AI-powered task automation and app builder ecosystem, which helps to reduce your general app and task automation time by approximately 70%. We're in a similar space like Zapier, Retool, etc., which is a 38 billion low-code industry. And we have also ran studies which showcases that 75% of the times when users use
And Basu, I'm gonna kick you to the question here.
Yes, definitely. 75% of the times when users use us, they see 80% reduction in time in commonly used applications. I have two questions for you. We are pre-product, very much in beta, but still have made over 100K in sales. What I'm looking for is, first, are there any more empirical evidences that I can add apart from the normal sales to showcase value in the product? That would be one. The second would be, while calculating the valuation, we're using multiple methods, but we're also using the VC method, right? In today's era, what is the discounted rate or the return rate that you look for when you're investing, given the economy and other condition and the AI trend that's going on in the market?
How are you pre-product with revenue?
We have actually taken the product, we have taken the demos, we have taken the base and showcased it to customers. We flew down all the way to multiple locations.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes, I see.
That's a paradox.
The bigger problem is we're not releasing the beta out in public. However much the product is ready and you can use it today. Right? We are only releasing it to customers that we can really work with.
All right. So look, I mean, if you tell me you can save me time on tasks, I'm probably going to ignore that. Okay. Because everybody says that. Right. And a lot of those, but if you, it's almost testimonials. If you look at a lot of task solving, task apps, whatever, management stuff, they'll have testimonials, they'll have logos, they have, oh, you know, we're used by Fang. Every Fang company uses us, or Google, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. So what other empirical evidence would help here, right? Like, we're building an ecosystem, we're not building a platform, right? We are bringing in together multiple things like task automation and apps, and I've not gotten started talking about apps, right? So I have an ecosystem that I'm worried about, but I'm looking for what things would impress you or as an investor and say that, hey, this looks promising, right? Like I have run studies which are independently run, right? And that's where I'm getting my numbers from today.
Are you like a PhD?
I have a master's degree in applied data science, and I have 15 years of experience working with this in the conversational AI industry.
You see, like, your numbers can enhance a story, but they don't tell a story. And so you're leaning real hard into empirical data of an experience. at the end of the day, do I like using your app or do I not like using your app?
You would love
Because there's
using
some things,
app.
you know what I'm saying? There's some things that are really good for me
I see.
that are just so painful that I will never implement that system.
Mhm.
Right. And so you're really I could be wrong, but if you come to me and you're like, oh, I want to talk to you about what we're doing, it's like, okay, well, do people actually like your product? Do you have advocates? Do you have champions that say, I want to use your product and I want to get it onboarded at my company?
Got it.
Right. If you go into a large company, you're not going to convince it might open the door, but it's not going to close it. Right. Or not going to close a deal. If you're like 74% of users report enhanced satisfaction with their tasks. Are they getting more work done?
All right.
Yeah. Makes sense.
all right.
I should listen better on ideas. Makes sense. Thanks, Rohit. This is helpful.
All good. This is why getting the reps in is important, right? Like we're gonna wrap here, but there's one more question in the chat I want to grab here from Sean. He said, you know, friends and family have a few $100K raised. How do you think about talking about the competition? Both sort of in how you presented in the pitch deck, like should you do direct side by side, feature by feature, or yeah, how do you think about storytelling around the competition? And Sean, if you want to jump in, I don't know if I saw you.
I'm hearing this. I mean, a lot of times, I mean, I've seen pitch decks. I'm in the world of healthcare for years, and you get these side by sides versus you truly have your own category. In our particular case, we have our own category, but you have to draw the audience to conclude to that. So how do you use the balance of the need to put it there to show you did diligence on vetting your competition and how you fit in? So just a quick comment on that from the team.
Okay, you're going to get asked about a competition, right? I'm sure you've already been asked. If you say we are our own category, it's tough to really buy that, right? I'm trying to think of something that when launched, there was nothing else like it, right? And going back to our earlier examples, Uber displaced cabs, Google displaced Yahoo, Alta Vista, Ask Jeeves, whatever. iPhones displaced Blackberries. And so you can say that we're the next iteration, right?
Well,
I mean, maybe ChatGPT, that's the last thing that was really a category definer. I'm trying to think of other examples.
I mean, I know we don't have time here today, but you know, I would argue that sometimes that is the very thing that's going to leave the leave behind effect that you want, because you have shown that you've done the discipline to say, hey, I have an iPhone. You never saw anything like it because you never had a touch screen. And Rohit, I was in the technology space in Silicon Valley designing the chipsets back in the day for these iPhones. So what I'm saying is sometimes you do have it, but to your point, you can't push that out because it may not be received well, but truly you have something that's quite novel and it's breakthrough.
Well,
so
let's just let me think of this. So if conceptually, right, if you think about, and this is healthcare, but I don't mean it to be, but like if you think about pharma, right, I found a novel molecule and I have a drug that does like something that nothing else does. How would I present that? I can cure cancer. How do I say I can cure cancer? Nothing else can. You know what I'm saying? Like,
but you would probably say that the market would have received it and would have it, and there's no IP. You'd stand up the normal defense cases on it. But anyway, I was just curious. I mean, there's no perfect answer. I just a lot of times you have to do the side by side.
So what I would say is like you got to get the reps in, right? So I would wager, you mentioned that you raised a few $100,000 friends and family, that like through those pitches you've probably tweaked how you talk about this, right? Like Finta, we have a cap table tool, right? It was one of the earlier things we built. It's more for like sharing your cap table in due diligence, right? But like a while ago when we were pitching, like the moment that even slightly came up, everyone's like, well, Carter's going to eat your lunch. This has nothing to do with Carter, right? But so you want to almost figure out how what you're presenting anticipates the neurons that are going to go down in the investor's brain, right? And you want to remove anything that's going to lead to a red flag in their head, and iterate your pitch in that way. And you'll only figure that out through like just doing lots of reps and pitching the competition slide. And so the other thing, then like representing it visually is super tricky. You know, I have found that I could spend months in Canva trying to do it myself. And then sometimes I just need like a designer friend who's like really good at visual graphics to be like, oh, I've done 17 of these in the last month, and this is how I would do it. And sometimes that's better because you're so in the weeds as the founder, you're so close to it. And the investor's just learning about it for the first time, just like your designer friend is learning about it for the first time, that they actually kind of create something that's better for getting people up to speed quick, if that makes sense. So,
Yep, gotcha.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Rohit, thank you very much for joining us and taking the time today. I know you're very busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything you want to plug or anything you want to push people to check out or learn more about you or future communities?
I'm happy to be helpful. Thank you for the invite. Happy to kind of keep it going. So,
all right.
Appreciate everyone's time.
We'll talk to you later. Have a great day. Stay curious.
Yep.